Hello.
Hi, we're back in the shed, Tales from the Shed, with more fantastic guests in the shed. And today we have the amazing Sarah Jepson. And we're just kind of talk to you about, because I've met you a few times and I've always been impressed by your amazing energy and presence. And that's great. So we thought we needed to have you in the shed.
Thank you so much. That's really kind.
So we've been talking a little bit just before we started recording, and it's a topic really close to my heart. I've worked with abused women. I've worked in women's refuge, and what was so lovely about this is the message of a beacon of hope that we came through. But before we kind of look at that, I think the whole story is a hope story. So we will get there.
Yeah.
But it's just looking at what it is like, how it happens, how it creeps up, the intelligent, strong, and women can end up in a place they just didn't know they were in until they realized they'd got there. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, take it away, Sarah.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting to start on that point because I hadn't really admitted to myself that I was in an abusive relationship until I went to see a counselor. I knew obviously something wasn't right, and it wasn't until I sat opposite this woman and she was like, "You do know you're in an abusive relationship, aren't you?" And I think there's this whole, kind of like not shame, but this embarrassment of even considering that you've allowed that to happen to you, and that you've invited it into your life, and you should be stronger, and all of these things. And I think for me, my preconceived idea of like how abuse would show up was complete violence. That abuse meant I would have been hospitalized, that X, Y, and Z would have happened to me, and I would have had cuts and bruises all over me. So I think because what had happened to me in my personal situation was very much coercive control, intimidation, the volatility and the kind of like aggression showed up in a different way, like throwing a cup of water over me, flicking a cigarette, squashing me against the door, driving a car up to my tent and up to my head. All of these various ways, I couldn't go to the police and show them anything.
And also, I don't know your experience, but you're talking very much like I've heard over and over in clinic. And it was almost like, if you do confront it, it's it was a joke. I mean, if I did that to a bloke, they wouldn't mind. Why are you being so, it's sort of so undermining, and that you begin to doubt what you're really seeing and feeling, don't you?
Oh, exactly. It became so normal. And, what I've spoken about before is what happened to me is I became more and more isolated. And I guess it's really hard as well, because to the outside world, I've always been an extrovert, confident, career driven. So therefore, I wouldn't look like the type of woman that this would happen to. But my story is, and one of the things I'm really passionate about, is it can happen to anybody, any walk of life, any financial situation. So just because that person's confident doesn't mean that it hasn't or isn't happening to them. And
it's one of the things that I hear that so much. It's like, but I'm this. And I said, well, men, because a lot of the time it is men abusing women, although I do have, I'll just ride on that, I've got 2 men as clients that are being abused.
We're not saying abuse is exclusive to women, but we can't ignore the overriding statistics.
The overriding statistics is, it just is. But it's almost like I said, they want different things. They don't want necessarily the easy prey. They quite like tough one. They quite like breaking the one that was hard to break, or I had to go around the corner and really try hard, because that one would have been straightforward. But this one seems to be, and it is sort of this way of
they want the fire, but they don't want anyone else to look at the fire. It's like they want to put the fire out, and conquer you and own you, because I know that this person that I was married to, he was attracted to my personality and that I was career driven, and found that really attractive. But there's a difference between admiring someone from afar and finding that attractive. Then when they've got you, they've got to handle the feelings that they have around envy and jealousy. And if they found you attractive, then of course everyone else does. And that is just ridiculous anyway, because that doesn't always happen. But yeah, so I think, you know, abuse can show up in so many different ways. And for me, going back to how I became isolated was, you know, in situations where, let's say there was a work night out, everyone else would get excited and want to go along. I'd want to go along, but I'd have to plan. When can I ask him? When can I talk about that there's this event that I want to go to? If I mention it 2 weeks before, that's 2 weeks of potential hell. If I mention it a week before, he'll know that I knew before, and then I'll be called a liar and being manipulative. I then have to go through, what am I allowed to wear? What will he be okay with me wearing? What time can I get home? I would come home to find that he was more absolutely inebriated. Oh God, it would just be horrendous. He would be punching through the door, questioning me, who I sat next to, how many drinks I had, what did I talk about? So it got to the point that I was like, screw this, I'm just not going to go. I just won't go anymore. I won't go, because the pain of what I was faced with was just too horrific. So that isolated me. And then, you know, his family would come over to the house. They would see that furniture was missing from our house because he destroyed it, or there was another hole in the wall, and they would just laugh about it. So again, I would think,
it's me.
It's me. Like, what? I find this really frightening and weird and odd, but they seem to find this completely and utterly normal. So that made me feel like I was going absolutely crazy. And then a situation where our neighbors, I met them years later when I'd kind of left and got myself to safety. And I saw them and they were like, oh, I'm glad you're safe now. You know, there were so many times we almost called the police. So another one of my kind of mantras, not mantras, but campaigns, is around domestic abuse is everybody's responsibility. If you hear something, see something, if somebody at work is not behaving or they're not coming to an event, I'm not saying act with suspicion that therefore every woman is being abused or every person is being abused, but 9 times out of 10, there's something in your gut that says someone's changed or something's happened to them, and just investigate or ask how they are. You know, if my neighbors had called the police, I wasn't brave enough because, again, I still didn't think what was happening to me was bad enough for the police to be even interested. And unfortunately, anyway, don't get me started on my interactions with the police, but yeah, it's scary how quickly it can happen to you, and how I had changed who I was, the clothes that I would wear, and all of the things that I would do, and who I would hang out with or not hang out with, to pacify, because that was an easier life for me.
And I think it's interesting what you said before about how, why is it we always focus on the victim, you know, X percentage of women are abused, rather than how many men are actually perpetrating this.
It's interesting. So I went on to Chat GPT and asked it, could it try and work out the statistic for me? I said, if this is the statistic of women, just as a hypothesis, and it couldn't do it, and it wouldn't do it, which I found really interesting, because I understand it is complex, because one man could perpetrate against 10 women, 5 women, many women. I understand, but I'm like, well, I'm sure there's some kind of mathematical equation out there that could try and figure this out. So that's something that I am really keen to shift the narrative on, and I'm working with a PR specialist to look at how we can get this as a deeper discussion around, you know, rather than looking at women as victims, let's look at perpetrators, and let's try and offer solutions or training or whatever it is around this. And it's an epidemic for women. It really is.
It's an epidemic, absolute epidemic. And I think if you were to look back in your time, with all the things that you've learned from that, what would you say would be your first red flag? So if we're looking for, you know, if women are in a situation, what would be that you would look back on?
I would say, going back to, we are wired, our body tells us when something is not right. And our gut instinct and these chemical reactions, we know when something is not right, and when someone acts or behaves in a controlling way or is manipulating you. I guarantee, well, I believe women know what is happening, but we are too scared to tune into that.
And these guys are clever, you know, that in the same way a
They're
lot of
charming.
women are lawyers and all sorts of, you know, highfalutin jobs. These guys are, you know, they're not the thugs of the council estate necessarily. You know, these guys are clever people that manipulate. So they tend to, I feel this isn't right, and they'll go, oh no, it is because. So you're coming up against that, aren't you?
So yeah,
you're saying trust your gut.
I think trust your gut, and just, you know, for me, it's really tricky because I kind of, you know, was in probably quite a vulnerable place when I started my relationship. So I went all in, and because I'm an all-in kind of person, I threw myself into the relationship, got, you know, I was so hungry to be loved and wanted to be loved and wanted this fairy tale, and all of my friends had left Devon and gone back to London, and I wanted to make it work here. And it was almost like I was part of the ingredients that kind of made this happen as well, because I was very young and I hadn't done the inner work to really truly value myself. And I think in some respects, how he treated me, I probably didn't think I was worthy of much more. In some respects. So I think the biggest gift that I will try and pass down to my children is self-confidence, belief, taking things slowly, relationships slowly, which I know is really hard because, you know, love is love and it's intoxicating.
And if somebody loves you, it's all going to be fine.
Yeah, and my plea would
just a few bumps on the road.
Yeah. and I guess my plea would be to, you know, my friends were absolutely amazing in as much as they had difficult conversations with me. Like, Sarah, we're worried about you. And, you know, admittedly, I bashed them off, but they never gave up. They would, you know, and had they given up on me, I would have been totally, totally isolated. And my friends stood by me through him burning all of my possessions. And I mean everything: my childhood diaries, my passport, my birth certificate, all of my clothes. And they collectively went through this trauma with me, and the many traumas that I went through, and they never, ever, ever, ever gave up on me, even when I'm sure it hurt them to see me then go on to marry this guy. They didn't stop loving me. And my plea would be to anyone that is witnessing someone going through, and as hard as you find it, please do not shut that door. If you can't, please don't shut that door, because that could be the one door that they need when everyone else has gone. Because I get it, you know, I think back now to what they must have witnessed and how it must have been horrific for them to see what was happening to me and hear about it. And
people say, well, if this, then that. If that happened, I love that thing. If somebody ever hit me, I would leave. And you think, well, good luck with that. Yeah. If this, then that is not how it works, because it's coercive. That's the tricky bit.
And it's an addiction, the drama triangle. I was addicted. It wasn't until I came out of my marriage that I think my body tried to like regulate, but then I would find that I would seek out drama because I was addicted to this triangle of, you know, my ex-husband. We would have obviously these very awful situations, but I was then almost addicted to the adrenaline and the making up and this wave. So it took many years for me to find my groove with calmness. And that's the one thing that I've spent 10 years working on, is flattening these things. But it's taken a lot. It's taken a lot, because I was addicted to it as much as anything, you know, that. Yeah. And the statistics, again, I think it's like 7 times before a woman actually leaves. When she actually leaves, that is when you are your most vulnerable of being killed or attacked. So, you know, it's a pretty harrowing experience to go through. in terms of like leaving and finally staying away. So
I think maybe just kind of finishing with reiterating that trust your gut.
Yeah.
And we definitely will come back to this in another tale in the shed.
We've had this bit, but now we're going to do the beacon.
We're going to talk about hope.
Exactly.
What's most important in your world is not what you went through so much as you are a survivor and a thriver.
Yeah, exactly.
Which we'll get to.
So we'll speak to you shortly, and for now, that's
yes, absolutely. Part 1 is done. Thank you, ladies.